Mets prospect Ronny Mauricio is making us take notice with what he's doing in spring training. He has homered in 2 consecutive games, and both of them were moonshots. How could he figure into the Mets' plans this year or into the future? We're going to do a deep dive on what Ronny's doing and what it means for his development on today's edition of Locked On Mets.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on Twitter at FinkelsteinRyan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. Ronny Mauricio is a prospect that I have been hot and cold on. I've been up and down, and I don't even know where I still fall on him. But of all the players in camp so far, and we're 3 days into games at this point, no one has turned more heads or grabbed more attention than Ronny Mauricio, because he has hit 2 absolute mammoth home runs. First one I was at Sunday, hit the ball 450 feet. 110 mile per hour exit velocity. Second home run was 108 and change and over 400 feet again. So he now has 2 insanely far home runs. And he was also speaking with, I believe it might have been Gelbs. I don't remember who was doing the interview after that first homer, but he said that in the past he hit a home run over 500 feet. So you are looking at light tower power from Ronny Mauricio, and you begin to dream about a guy that could play shortstop and hit 30 home runs. Now, the Mets already have that guy in Francisco Lindor, so the position is not necessarily there for Mauricio. But when you see an athlete of his size, someone who really has just added muscle year over year, he's 6'3", he has this big build, and he has a certain star quality about him, and then he puts bat on ball the way he has the last couple of games, where he is just lifting and driving. It makes you hope. It makes you wonder. Before we really dive into his long-term fit, though, I do want to acknowledge that these are spring training home runs, and Ronny Mauricio, unlike other guys, is coming off 203 plate appearances in the Dominican Winter League, where he won the MVP. Now, in that showing, he hit 287, 335 on base, 468 slug, got the OPS over 800, which was great. Had 15 doubles, 2 triples, 5 home runs. He was an amazing player, and he was, again, the MVP of that league. That also, though, puts him in a position now where he is in more midseason form than probably anybody on the diamond. So when he's facing up against some of these pitchers that are just trying to get their feet wet and maybe earn a job, it's not surprising he can take what they throw him and deliver into the seats. It's the way that he's driving the baseball that is so enticing. This guy has incredible pop, and exit velocities of 110 miles per hour and home runs to travel 450 feet. As I mentioned on yesterday's show, that is exclusive to the likes of Pete Alonso. So that makes you look at Ronny Mauricio as a prospect and take a second glance if you've been a doubter. And I have certainly been a doubter. Anytime last year where there was a possible trade scenario, I was throwing Ronny Mauricio in the package. He has awful discipline, or had awful discipline at the plate. His swing decisions were not good. He chased like Javi Baez in the minor leagues last year. But he had 26 home runs and 541 plate appearances. So it's a measure of the good of a free swinger, like what we've seen when Javi Baez is at his best, and the fact that they could be the worst player on the field. It's that pendulum. He's either going to be awesome or he's going to be bad, and it's trying to ride those streaks. And I think for Mauricio this season, it's about showing that some consistency can develop, and he's still young enough that we can't just look at the larger sample size of what he's been and say that's a finished product. He turns 22 years old the beginning of April. He still has a lot of room for development. He has been playing in leagues with guys a lot more older than him throughout his entire minor league career. So now he probably takes the jump again to AAA, where once again he's going to be facing guys that are older than him. He's going to be facing guys that are really going to pitch to his weaknesses, as opposed to guys in AA that are more likely to be pitching to their own strengths. So getting game plan against is something he's going to have to adjust to. And I would not be surprised at all if, as the competition rises, and I do think the competition in AAA Syracuse is going to be better than what he was seeing in the Dominican League, despite the high intensity of those games, we could see Ronny Mauricio exposed a little bit. But what if he's not, though? What if he makes his adjustments? What if he's able to take that 287 average that he had in the Dominican Winter League, and he can have a facsimile of that in AAA, where maybe he's hitting 280 or 275. Maybe he can get that on base percentage instead of below 300 at 296. Maybe he can get that up to 315, 320, maybe even 330, or the 335 he had in the Winter League. If he can produce a slash line like the one he had there in AAA by the end of this season, if he can make the adjustments and thrive in that league, well, we're going to be looking at Ronny Mauricio as a completely different prospect than what we saw previously. And if Brett Beatty graduates and becomes a big part of this team, if Alvarez is a part of this team as the starting catcher, if Mark Vientos has a role hitting left-handed pitching on this team, or it maybe even moved, if those guys are cleared out, and I think he's already ranked ahead of Vientos in a lot of people's top prospects, I'm going to be working on my top 10, and I'll be doing that at some point before opening day. And I'm not exactly sure where I have those two guys. If I have Mauricio ahead of Vientos or the other way around, where does Alex Ramirez factor in? I don't know. But the point being, if those three guys are no longer part of the picture when it comes to the top 10 Mets prospects, by the end of the year, Ronny Mauricio could be the top prospect in this system. If not him, you're probably looking at Alex Ramirez, or I guess if Kevin Parada has a great year. So he has a chance to really raise his stature with a big season here, and he is making you take notice of him right now, and we'll see if this continues. If he goes out this spring and hits 7 home runs, which you say that's ludicrous, but he has 2 already, and these guys can maybe go on streaks, he's not going to make the roster, but you might look at him a little bit differently. And I think what Buck Showalter said is, with guys at this age, the bigger thing is the defense. And I think that's where there's a little more questions, a little more concerns about his ability to stay at shortstop, or also just wondering where that would put him factoring with the Mets moving forward. So I want to get to that element of this. Where is he going to play this year in AAA Syracuse? And what does that mean for his future? Where could he find a home if the Mets decide to hang on to him and believe in him as a prospect? We're going to get to that in just a minute. First, though, today's episode is brought to you by Built Bars. I love my Built Bars because I'm trying to lose weight. It allows me to just avoid the cravings that'll always bring you down when you're dieting. If it's that candy bar you're trying to have, maybe it's the cookies or the sweets. Altogether, you just don't want to be putting that bad stuff in your body, especially when you can find a protein bar that tastes like a candy bar, comes covered in 100% real chocolate with incredible flavors like the churro, the peanut butter brownie, the coconut almond. The best part, only 130 calories, only 4 grams of sugar, a whopping 17 grams of protein, whether it's a breakfast bar to start the day, a protein bar to get you ready for your workout or for post-workout. Built Bars are the answer. And while I still love to go to Built.com myself because I like to get the mixed box, try some different flavors, if you don't want to wait for that package to come in the mail, head to your local Walmart or Sam's Club today. You can go to Walmart, grab a 4-bar box of the cookies and cream, the double chocolate, or the coconut puffs, or head to a Sam's Club, grab a 13-bar box of their hit flavors, the brownie batter or the churro. You can thank me later. Go to your local store and buy Built Bars today. Ronny Mauricio does not necessarily have a long-term defensive home as it relates to the New York Mets, because he plays shortstop, and the Mets have this guy under contract for a long time named Francisco Lindor that's not giving up that position anytime soon. And Ronny Mauricio himself, when interviewed, was asked about it, and he suggested third base is the home that he likes the most if he's not playing shortstop. Maybe he wants to stay in the infield. Well, who is going to be the third baseman of the future then? Is it Brett Beatty, who we've discussed a little bit yesterday, and we're going to be discussing more on Friday? Or is it Ronny Mauricio? I could make an argument that maybe long-term the Mets would be best suited with a Brett Baty in left field and a Ronny Mauricio at third base. If Ronny Mauricio is the better infielder as the shortstop, maybe that is ultimately where things go. It's up to Brett Baty this year to prove he can stick at third base and be an asset there, and that's what's ultimately going to get him on the roster anyway. So the defense is the component that we forget about these guys, and it is interesting that's really the only question mark with all the Mets' top prospects, with Brett Baty, with Mark Vientos, with Francisco Alvarez, and also with Ronny Mauricio. I think the fact that the Mets are keeping Mauricio at shortstop is illuminating, though, in multiple ways. In one respect, keep the guy in his natural position of shortstop as long as you can. It's going to build his value, and the thought is always you can move him off shortstop to another position at any time, and he'll be able to survive there. If he's continuing to get better at shortstop, that would enhance him to be able to figure out third base one day. If he's as good of an athlete to play shortstop, you figure you can throw him into a corner outfield spot, and he would be able to adjust. If Ronny Mauricio was going to be part of the 2023 Mets, I believe they'd be taking time in spring to get him some reps in the outfield. They'd be trying to get him some reps at third base. They are not. When Francisco Lindor goes to WBC, I imagine we're going to see some Guillorme at short, and we're going to see Ronny Mauricio at short. And when you think about this season, that is another element of this that we forget about. When you're in a front office and you're Billy Epler, you are trying to prepare for every scenario that can unfold for your ball club throughout a season. There is a scenario that's out there that is not a likely one considering his durability throughout his career, where you might be without Francisco Lindor at some point. And you have to think, if that happens in August, who is going to play the position? Right now, and most likely it'd be Louis Guillorme, or it'd be Danny Mendick. But you want Ronny Mauricio to have 75, 80 games under his belt as a AAA shortstop who could be raking, where if something happened, you'd have that option as your depth at a position that otherwise the depth is rather thin. As I said, Guillorme, Mendick, and that's about it. So he's a good option in that sense. I do think that the Mets are still operating under the belief that Ronny Mauricio could net them a piece if they decide to move him. But his stature as a prospect has to be brought back to a point where he can be the headlining piece to get you that player, and not just that player at the deadline. The Mets want to trade with players that have control. So if you're not getting control and it's just a rental, I don't know if they're going to be including a prospect like Ronny Mauricio. They're probably going to be looking more in the rental bin they shopped in last year. And even then, think about it, they still got guys with control. They still got Vogelback and Ruff who had control beyond the season. So control is very important to them. And because of that, you need a guy like Mauricio to be as valuable of a prospect as possible if he's going to be included in trades. And that's why he's still playing shortstop. So long term, I don't know what the home is at third base, or I've been calling him right field Ronnie. That's a possibility as well. But only time is going to tell on that front. This year, I don't necessarily expect to see Ronny Mauricio. I'd put it at less than 5% chance that we actually do see him at the big league level. But what we're going to see him is play every single day in AAA, and I am going to be really curious to see how he responds with the glove and the bat, and if he can get himself to a point where the Mets start to have some tough decisions to make, not only at the deadline, but beyond that as we head into next offseason, and just how they try to fit the talent that's coming up onto the roster. And that's part of what I want to discuss next, and I also want to discuss which prospect is most likely to be moved at the deadline this year. We're going to get to that in a minute. First, though, another word from our sponsors. Could Ronny Mauricio be traded at the deadline this year? I think there's a distinct possibility of that. I think Mark Vientos is a guy that could be moved based on his lack of a clear position on the Mets roster. And I look at Alex Ramirez as a guy that I hope is untouchable, but could probably be the headliner to get you whatever you needed to get, let's just say, for whatever reason. Mark Canha fell off a cliff, or Brandon Nimmo just wasn't available, or Marte went down, and you decided we need Brian Reynolds. That's where you might have to trade a piece like Ramirez, even though I wouldn't want to see it. And I think Kevin Parada falls under a similar class, but because they have Alvarez, I think Parada is a little more expendable. So when it comes to sort of power ranking the trade assets the Mets have, obviously Beatty and Alvarez are the most valuable, but I think they're untouchable. So I really do believe that the top trade asset the Mets have, it's Alex Ramirez or even Jet Williams, but I think that they are closer to the untradeable than tradable type assets to the Mets. And then I think that Ronny Mauricio and Kevin Parada probably are maybe kind of neck and neck for the most valuable assets because of what Mauricio is doing to improve his status in the game. Although, again, there might be a lot of smart, analytically driven front offices that look at all the data on Mauricio and think this guy will get exposed at the highest level. I still, when I look at the numbers and I look at all the data, I still can find that conclusion. But when you see these steady improvements he's made and what he's done this winter and how he looks in spring, and you can dream on the potential of a guy that if he can really perfect that swing and refine his approach and knows when to attack and when to be patient, this is another guy the Mets have that top outcome can be a 40-homer guy. They had that in Alvarez, they had that in Vientos, and they have that in Mauricio. Not to say they'll reach that top outcome. A lot has to break right for them. But to have that level of incentive on a player, if everything is able to pan out for you, that's why you are patient with a guy like Ronny Mauricio. That's why you try to hold on to him and focus on his development as much as you can. You prioritize his development and putting him in good positions to succeed, like staying in AA all last year, probably staying in AAA all this year, so that one day that could pay off for you in a big, big way, whether it is as a player that will be a part of the Mets' future as a starting third baseman or a starting right fielder, a starting left fielder, and I guess even a starting second baseman. Really, he'd be a big dude at second, but you never know. Or if he's a guy that can build up enough value in himself that he can be the piece that gets you the piece that you need to put you over the hump when you need it. So, bottom line from all this, keep on watching that Grapefruit League action and watching the way that Ryan Mauricio torches baseballs. And if he continues to do that and he carries that into his season in AAA, there's going to be a point where we won't be able to deny him as the top prospect that he's becoming. Because physically, he's as gifted as anyone in this farm system. It's just a matter of being the baseball player that can utilize the skills that he does possess. Anyway, that's going to be all for today's edition of Locked On Mets. As always, thank you for listening. Make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. Make sure you follow me on Twitter, @FinkelsteinRyan. Follow the show at Locked On Mets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen every day. Now for your second listen, check out Locked On Fantasy Baseball. Win your league by listening to Matt and Dom every day as they bring you the best fantasy draft strategies. Find Locked On Fantasy Baseball wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.